So welcome to this presentation by Naomi Steinberg. It's Goosefeathers, and the subtitle was?
Once Upon a Cartographic Adventure.
Perfect. Thank you. My name is Kathleen Schmidt. I'm a past president of the Canadian Authors Association, which is sponsoring this event. And I would also like to acknowledge that this festival takes place on the unceded homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. Or if you have a land acknowledgement that you would like to use based on your own location, please feel free to do that too. So Word Vancouver would like to take a moment to thank our generous donors and sponsors, especially SFU and the Writer Studio for this wonderful space and their continued generous support of Word Vancouver. Other supporters are Canada Arts Council, the Canada Book Fund, Canada Heritage Fund, BC Arts Council, BC Gaming, Creative BC, the City of Vancouver, and so on. There's a whole list of these if you wish to see who has come in and sponsored these. I would like to say in behalf of Canadian authors that we're very happy to sponsor this workshop. Canadian Authors is a national association that began in 1921, and we have the slogan of Writers Helping Writers, and we work with writers of all levels. We have conferences, we have a Canadian Author Literary Award, the BC branch, which is part of Canadian Authors, also has programs. We have monthly programs that are Zoom programs, and we have various kinds of other events, both on our website and it used to be in person. We're working on that. So Naomi Steinberg was born on the supernatural west coast of Canada. She's an internationally recognized artist and storyteller and has brought traditional folk stories, fairy tales, and community-based art projects to life in countries around the world since 2001. Her playful, evocative storytelling, performances, and workshops have been covered in the Huffington Post, Plank Magazine, and China.com. She's facilitated workshops for organizations, including Mosaic, EcoTrust, and the European Parliament, and felt proud to be included in both the UNYA and Musqueam Indigenous canoes for pulling together Goosefeather. Goosefeather is her first book.
Thank you so much, Kay.
Welcome.
Thank you. And it's true, you know, I have a 20-plus year career as a storyteller, telling traditional folk and fairy tales. So I definitely belong to the world of oral tradition. And this is ephemeral, you know, it rides on the air between you and I. And if I make a mistake as it comes out of my mouth and lands in your ear, well, it's okay because it's gone. And so when I came home from this adventure of going around the planet and people were encouraging me to write a book, one of the scariest things was that it's tangible. This is an object that has a physical life. And if you don't like it, you can hold me accountable to it, which is kind of scary. And the other very big challenge for sure was, how do I bring everything that I do with my gaze, with my breath, with my body? How do I bring all of what, you know, the standard phrase would be, from the stage to the page? How does one do that? This is not a panel about that. This is more going to be about me sharing the great adventure that I had going around the planet and maybe some of the whys that I did this thing. And maybe before I begin, I don't know if you can actually see this, and I'm sorry for those people out in a live stream land that this might be much too small for you. I don't know. perhaps. So if this thin line that you see here is the trajectory that I took around the planet. And here's a little legend that has some quantifiables, like how many water bottles did I lose? It was two only water bottles, because I do love this planet and I feel beholden to doing my best for not creating waste. How many days on the road was I? 382. How many performances did I have? 37. Here's some questions for you. Just put them somewhere in the back of your mind, and then as I'm doing the reading, perhaps you'll have your own questions rise up, and I'm very happy to have any kind of discussion or conversation. In fact, enfolded in the performance that I did when I was going around the planet, there was always included a Q&A. So, because we're live, we're interactive, and you all have rich and fertile minds and hearts as well. So I'm always very curious to know where things are at for you. So where would you go? If you were off on a great adventure, where would you go? How would you travel? What would you bring? When is a good time for adventure? And then the final one, why do people like helping each other? So I don't actually know how many of you know any of the context for what I just said. So let me read you from this book, and it will help position us. In 2011, I interviewed Grand-Père, my maternal grandfather, in Paris. It was then that the research, writing, and developing of what became Goosefeather began. And by 2014, it was clear that I not only had a complicated story to tell, but also an entertaining show that wanted to be on the road. In a time of massive, irregular human migration, intensified fear-mongering, and eroding ecological stability, I would be going around Earth by land and sea, carrying a sustained gesture towards time, space, and love. Through a fun 45-minute, one-woman clown-come storytelling show full of meandering meaning, I would be bringing a question and performing a challenge. When traveling this planet, why not carry your own heart-centered prime meridian, knowing that neural networks can be trained towards kindness? The long process of bringing words to lived experience crossed valleys and peaks. With sweat and joy did I discover these sentences now set to page. My hope is that this book marks what I came to think of as a movement and an inquiry into right relation. That is, the act of sensing towards mutuality and autonomy. In my thinking, how we embody and live our values can be the performance of right relation. It is a term borrowed from Buddhism and can be considered an ethical framework and ethos. As such, I ask you to think on this. What happens when we problematize privilege, experience pain, acknowledge the awesome, unknowable processes at play on the planet, and celebrate the many compassionate and delightful actions concurrently occurring every moment? What if then, even when the circumstances were not easy, we lived by that which we knew we loved? This world is at times heartening and at times confronting. Towards it, I raise my glass. And now, Goosefeather needs to go adventuring. So that adventure began November 2014, when I debuted the performance called Goosefeather. So Goosefeather was based on these interviews with my grandfather, where I went with three main questions. Why am I so stubborn? What's so interesting about measurement? He was obsessed by the metric system. I think he was very proud of the fact that it was a French invention. So he's very upright and very like, we measure. And then my third line of inquiry was, how did he help my grandmother survive the Second World War? She's Jewish, he's not. How and why the risk? And I called him a hero, and he dismissed the notion of heroism, saying that he only did it because he wanted to. Each one of us has our lot in life, and each one of us has whatever particular abilities that we're born with. And if there's something that he deemed wrong, such as the Nazi regime, he would just do his best to do whatever he could. And in this case, it meant marrying my grandmother and giving her his name, and therefore hiding her, and also taking members of the family to the south of France, to a village in the south of France where they were able to well, most of them were able to survive, but some of them unfortunately were denounced as well. So I'd interviewed him and started to build a bit of a story, came back to Canada, started to build a bit of a story, as I said, 20-year career as an oral storyteller. So here I was writing a story and memorizing, which is very difficult. I don't prefer to memorize. I prefer to learn by heart and perform and let that carry on the magic carpet. But everybody was telling me, but your writing is very good. You should make the effort to memorize. And so, okay. So then I was memorizing. And I was researching things like, why do people measure? And I was researching map making. And in the end, I discovered that map making, cartography, primarily serves three things: conquest, commerce, and curiosity. Distributable maps and replicable coordinates are pragmatic and achievable goals. Though all cartographers admit no measurement is absolute in its accuracy. Know that. No measurement is absolute in its accuracy. Everything changes. For example, due to refinements in measuring tools and because of tectonic drift, among other variables, Earth's prime meridian is now approximately 100 meters east from where it was first marked in Greenwich in 1851. It could therefore be argued that we measure against an arbitrary mobile point zero. Dear reader, or dear listeners, let us consider this lack of accuracy. There is always that which is being measured and that which is doing the measuring. In between the two, let us admit a third space, there where they meet. If we then also factor in the shifting perspectives, priorities, preferences, abilities, and agendas of the measurers, frames of mind, if you will, it stands to reason there is a possible imprecision inherent to every act of measurement, which colors every gradient. Therefore, while the margin of error necessitated by this thought exercise may only be the most absurd of teensy-tiny quantum fractions, we can nevertheless take the opportunity to practice knowing that we don't know. We can practice knowing that the unknown and the mystery accompany us with grace. We can believe love. Just checking in, does everybody know what a prime meridian is? I'm seeing nodding. So if I wanted to measure the space between you and I'd have to start somewhere. So I could start from the edge of the table. Maybe then we would, hello, hi, nice to see you, Elizabeth, nice. I could start from here, and then somebody could hold a tape measure, and that would be the point zero, the prime meridian, right? So point zero is on the planet is considered Greenwich. And in this case, I was choosing my heart as the point zero from which to navigate the planet. And I set off, and I'm going to skip ahead. Did you know it's World River Day today? It's International World River Day. And what percentage of us is water? 75% of us is water. Slosh yourself around for a little moment. Isn't that nice? Water is life, right? And all the metaphor of a river, they say you can't dip into the same river twice. All that movement of all that water, it's always changing and changing and changing. So in honor of World River Day, I'm really skipping quite far ahead. Today, 231, all the days of this journey are marked in this Well, no, I didn't write about every single day, don't worry. But it's chronological. It follows the trajectory around the planet. And yes, so in honor of World River Day, I thought I would share with you this from Switzerland. It was a hot, sweaty walk over the bridge, and another reframe of self was imperative when I arrived. After being shown the space's particularities, where I was going to be performing that evening, after being shown the space's particularities, a young miss and I tumbled down the hill through the riparian zone to the promenade that extends along the swiftly flowing Aar, the name of a river, the Aar. Many were there, thoroughly enjoying the river's glacier green color. Some would plunge in and travel down river by water, things in a dry bag attached to their body. Others chose simply to dip, float, exit, walk upriver, repeat. We were amongst those. In the glacier green waters of the swiftly flowing Aar, I had a revelation. Worldly concerns washed away, and into deep mysteries I saw. Nearly overwhelmed, I became conscious of vast eons of time during which the current had been pulling an enormous volume of water down that earthy stone channel. Eternity revealed its veil, and I felt constancy and presence, wisdom embodied beyond any egoic notion. Such a sense of awe was engendered, which felt so good, that I decided to aim for putting some of that refreshing realization into the evening's performance. 2100 o'clock. I may or may not have been successful. These things are hard to know in any kind of immediate sense. What I do know is that afterwards, when we tumbled to the street and populated the stairs in front of the Hauptsitz with our banter and our popcorn, it felt like all might be all right with the world. We were new friends and old, gathering in support of curiosity, celebration, and care. Zurich, day 233. Karin, another distant dear one whom I first met when we both lived and worked at a Tibetan Buddhist monastery in India, hosted me for the duration of my stay in Zurich. The heat wave was still strong, and the shade of large trees spread over the cemetery to which we'd wandered one day provided respite from the late afternoon sun. A patch of grass with dappled light invited us to stretch, to take rest. Shadows moved, our conversation became spacious. I felt my eyelids drooping. Of a sudden, a man appeared, asking if we intended to sleep the night where we were. Karin and I looked at each other, then simultaneously shook our heads. No, to sleep in the graveyard was certainly not our intention. "Also," said the man in a Swiss manner and ambled off. Taking this as signal that it was time to move along, we got up and headed towards the exit, only to find that the main gate had been closed and locked. In fact, all three gates were closed and locked. Eyes widening slightly and eyebrows rising, we contemplated the feasibility of leaping over wall, impossible, before beginning to search for an alternate way out. In the distance were the faint sounds of a brass band. We headed in that direction. The length of fence at the edge of the graveyard we arrived at was partially dismantled, so we scrambled through, careful to avoid being barbed by wire. The brass band was louder now. We continued towards it and discovered a community fair in full swing. Karin and I re-entered the world of the living with a dance, leaving in the cemetery whatever it was that had been ready to rest there forevermore. So I'm curious, if I sit down, am I still okay? Good. I'm curious if already anybody might have any questions or comments, thoughts about what you've heard, or something you might already want to hear more about. Yes?
On the first remark,
It is, huh? That flow. It's beautiful. Thank you.
A couple of thoughts came to mind when you were talking about the observer and the mapping. Curious to know too if you saw the meter with us.
No.
The original meter that's up on the wall there on one of those.
Yeah, no, I didn't.
When you're talking about the observer and mapping and stuff, in quantum physics, they talk about when the observer affects the observation. There's no such thing as objective observation. The other thought that came to mind was the statement, the map is not the territory, by the Russian Count Goosefeather. So these are things that were in your mind.
Absolutely. This is exactly the kind of profound thinking that I was suddenly being exposed to as I was doing my research. You know, not only did I have my grandfather who was so rational and so certain and so short of words, but with this love of measurement and everything that it brought him. But then, you know, as I entered the research, it was definitely into the realm of quantum physics and then deeply into the world of like, well, you know, kind of deconstructive, everything is, you know, it's relational, but it's positional, and what is true, and it's also slippery. And so then as somebody who not only has a 20-year career with storytelling, but I also embrace clown. So there was a very absurd element that I welcomed, where I don't think that we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like, I'm wearing a watch, calendars are useful, right? Like that first passage that I read where I'm talking about how cartography serves these three things, it's a wonderful thing. But perhaps if we were able to take all of that with a little grain of salt, we'd be less certain of our certainty, and maybe there would be less war. You know, that's the absurdity that I embrace, that I reach for, and that I hope to, you know, catalyze some good thinking and some good feeling, and maybe we can have a dance or something like this, right? Because come on, isn't life to be enjoyed? And just regarding what you brought forward with how quantum physics speaks of it or whatnot, it's I mean, as a storyteller, there's an expression that we use, which is that stories are like ferry boots. So ferries, like not the ferry that takes you across the water, but like, ooh, the ferry, right? So stories are like ferry boots. They're bigger on the inside than the outside. So how is that, right? How is that we can go in and perspectivularize? You know, we can gain new awarenesses. We can color whole new, never seen before colors. We might not be able to describe them, but we feel them. We know them. There's this auric presence. So yeah, that's exactly the way that my mind started to think. And then I had to squish it all into a 40-minute performance. And yeah, thank you. Yeah.
How do you account for culture, and how does that come through in your performance, and does it translate to the page?
How do I account for culture?
Going around the world.
Oh, wow. Okay, so you know, I don't know if you know that Canadian audiences are quite stoic. Like, I don't know if you know that, right? Like there can be a lot of what we might call flat affect, right? There's a lot of like, it's like, are you with me? Do you like this? Right? So that, you know, it's worse in Norway. Like that Norwegian audience was so, I didn't know where they were they with me, you know, and then I was talking about when I came in the room, I was like, I suffer terribly from imposter syndrome. So all my imposter syndrome came up, and I had great doubt. Why was I there? And people had paid money to be there. But then afterwards, one woman, she came up to me, and her husband was in tears, and he'd, you know, so much had been catalyzed inside of him. And that's really been my experience as a storyteller, and then as a performer of the Goosefeather story, is that we just don't know. We really don't. And I think that's part of, I guess, the learning curve that I continue to be on around, you know, empathy, compassion, allowing the unknown to truly, like, we just don't know. And so let's give each other a little bit of space for that as well. And then in Japan, I had a marvelous show wear. So for Goosefeather, I would wear a corset that was, it was a radical departure from my work as a storyteller, because as a storyteller, it's not a costume, it's not a character, it's not a script, right? So I'm telling you once upon a time, and woof, off we go on a magic carpet ride, and za, 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 and then perhaps at the end, they all lived happily ever after. I mean, it doesn't always happen, but hopefully it does, at least in the story. So here for this, I had a script that I had written, that I had memorized. I had a whole gestural vocabulary, and I kind of started to inhabit the body of a goose. So there I was with this whole, and I had this costume, a corset that had been made out of my grandfather's neckties. So quite a lovely garment, and then these cool ballooning pants and the whole thing. So when I was in Japan, one of the places that I got to perform, I mean, family's incredible, right? So one of my father's old law partners, her son is living in Japan, and he heard that I was in town, so he got my email, and he's like, oh, I'd like to set up a show for you for my English class, which happened to be elder women, mostly. So I showed up at this very sterile kind of conference hall restaurant type thing with big windows and chairs that were less comfortable than your chairs. And I'm only assuming that they're a little bit comfortable. And I came in from the back already as a goose, right? And I had my makeup, my hair, and this feather, and oh my goodness, all of those women, they clapped and they cooed and they loved me so much, and wow, 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 wow. And I got to the front and I began, and you may have noticed that I love words. I can be quite multisyllabic. You know, there's a lot of things and slightly complicated sentence construction. I've been called a little archaic in my sentence construction. That's okay. I'm okay with that. It's my voice. So then, like, the cooing and the pleasure dimmed a little bit, and then came the Q&A afterwards, and there were, you know, some questions that came forward, but one of the comments was, we really like your gesture, so there's meaning that's conveyed. The problem is we don't know what that meaning is. So there was some of that kind of cultural barrier that I would encounter. And then there was a third part maybe to your question.
That would translate off the page.
Wow.
When you get to those places, do you have some cultural influence in your writing?
That's a really interesting question. I'm not sure if I can speak to a cultural influence, but what I did was I created discipline for myself. And so I got home and I started writing. I got home in December and I started writing in February because enough people had said, you must write, you must write, you must write, right? So I started writing, and what I did was first I captured it all by hand. I just did broad strokes in a journal. And then I took that and I got to typing, trying to flesh out sentences and trying to make it happen in the computer. And it just became like impossible. I was really just sitting on that chair and being like, whoa. And I realized I'm so physical. I have to have a physical element to this. So then every day I would get up and I would do about a 15-minute physical warm-up, which included elements of a clown warm-up. So a clown might warm up their diaphragm. So a lot of like releasing of the diaphragm to be emotionally available. That's a lot of what a clown will do. And so I would like do that work of becoming emotionally available, at least even to myself, releasing, letting that flow happen. I would do some qigong. I would end this 15 minutes with shaking and bringing, kind of intending to have all that energy and all that flow come out through my fingertips. And that seemed to work for me. So I don't know if that's really responding to your question in terms of like culturally what I was doing. I'm not sure what else to say, but yes, that's what I've got. Yeah, thank you.
That's a great question.
Sure.
So how did you come to the title Goosefeather?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know there was a goose in your story, of course. Just wondering if you could comment more about that? And then how did you plan the journey? Because it's a huge journey. Was it more planning, or was it more some planning and some just let's see where the river takes me, go with the flow? And then how did you find the performance venues?
Thank you. So when I was doing the initial research, so 2011, went to Paris, interviewed my grandfather, and then he sent me to Roussillon. Roussillon is the village in the south where members of the family were hidden. And when I was there, I asked at the auberge where I was staying, was there anybody who was still alive from the wartime era that might be open to receiving me and maybe being interviewed? And they said yes. That I should go knock on Madame Georgette's door just before lunch because she would be home cooking. And I have written about that in here. And so I did go, and she said yes, she did remember my grandfather, and no, now was not a good time for an interview, but perhaps I could come back the next day at 9 in the morning. So I did, and she had brought 2 other women. So there was 3 elderly women and myself sitting in a living room with overstuffed chairs and the ticking wall clock. And they told me stories of my grandfather and how he would miss the first few months of school every year to help with the wheat, olive, and grape harvest. And they told me about Golden Saint, who was buried just outside the village. And they told me about the denunciations. And then they told me the formative legend of the land, which was incredible for me as a storyteller. I mean, just as a little aside, those North Shore mountains that we all have the great privilege to enjoy, you know, in 20 minutes we can be in the mountains. What? And there's wild creatures. Hello. So those 2 peaks that we see that are commonly known as the Lions, who have their older name, which is the 2 sisters, and all the legend that's wrapped up around that, and how it's a beautiful teaching tale of courage and of bringing peace to the village. So the way that landscapes carry stories and the way that that helps the humans who are in that landscape to be good is very precious to me. I find it one of our greatest gifts that we can exchange so freely. So they told me one of the formative legends of Roussillon, why is the soil so red? And then they proceeded to tell me that when the water from the well was first piped from the common well to each individual's house, you could buy 1 or 2 goose feathers worth of water pressure. And I found this so curious. Like already I was fascinated by measurement. Like, what is this thing and how do we measure things? And then now you're giving me this super weird measurement and I don't understand anything. And I called the mayor and I called the tourist office and nobody knew anything about this thing. So my brain being as it does, I just went kind of lateral and I went metaphoric and I went, well, you know, water is the realm of the emotions. And so maybe, you know, 2 goose feathers worth of water pressure, that means you can move more emotion through you. And so then it became a little prayer that I should have the capacity of 2 goose feathers worth of water pressure. So instead of the silence of my grandfather, which was difficult for many people in the family, that I should be able to hear these stories and then find a way to tell them and share them, and that there should be benefit or so, right? So that was the initial like catching of a goose feather. And then there's something really precious that happens in this town. You know, I was born here. My father was born here. There's something very precious that happens twice a year. We see the geese flying. And it's incredible. They became part of my research as well. And it's incredible, like the medicine of the goose, if you will, and how they're flying in a V to help each other. And when that front goose, she's a bit tired, she'll just go to the back and there's a new leader. And the ones in the back are honk, honk, honking their encouragement. So all of that was just so profound to me. And then also the goose feather is shinier on the inside than on the outside. So I was like, I get to be all like powerful and shiny like a goddess, but nobody needs to know. Like, I don't know, I just got all like mind exploded and things like that. So it happens regularly enough. And then of course there was the metaphor of the quill, or the image of the quill, right? So this liquid, this emotion, this movement that you can then put into the shaft of a feather, wow, and scribe with. That's incredible, right? So that's one more just little piece for that. When I showed my grandmother, the one here, not the maternal grandmother, but the paternal grandmother here in Vancouver, when I showed her the first illustration, this one, Jordan Bent, a colleague, he made these beautiful illustrations. And when I showed her this, and I said Goosefeather is the name, she just understood. You know, there was I loved my grandparents so much, and I miss them terribly. You know, I miss all our conversations and all their encouragement. And she just had one of those moments where she just sat back and started to glow. And she said, oh, I see, I understand. I don't really know what she saw and understood, but there was something very positive. Yeah. So that's your first question. Second question was?
Yeah, the planning of your journey.
Oh, not. One of the last things I did, one of the last pieces of work that I had here in Vancouver, it was actually in North Vancouver. I gave a storytelling workshop over several weeks to different newly arrived immigrants. And I thought, oh, let's be clever, Naomi. So at the end of the workshop, where there, I think, were 30 different people, I said, by the way, I'm going on this journey. So if anybody has any potential contacts or work for me in any of your respective countries, might I have your contact? And so one woman from Shanghai, she said, yes. And so then she said, end of March. And I said, okay. And I knew that I wanted to be in Japan for cherry blossom time. That was actually the primary reason, because I had the opportunity, actually at the central branch of the library many years ago, to tell the story of Sakura, the cherry blossom goddess. And I love that story. And so I just became determined to be in Japan in time for the opening of the cherry blossoms. So that gig in Shanghai and wanting to be in Japan for cherry blossom time meant that I worked backwards and found the cargo ship leaving California in time for me to get to Australia in time. I figured, 2-3 months, it should be enough time for me to make it. And so whoop, I went. And I kid you not, it was like a week before I left. I'm sure I'd looked at maps before in my life. I'm sure. I love maps. But it was when I really registered how huge the Pacific Ocean is. Huge. I was like, what? I'm doing what? I'm going to be on a cargo ship with 24 men for 3 weeks, crossing this enormous body of water. What am I doing? And so anyways, I went. And I would say I was about a month ahead of myself, barely a month ahead of myself in terms of planning. All of it. Where am I staying? When I arrive there, where do I change my money? Do I have the language? I mean, I'm so fortunate to have French and English, but wow, it was, I don't necessarily recommend it that way. But I'm so blessed, you know. I do recognize the incredible privilege that I have to have this kind of charismatic quality where I felt like I could like show up and smile, and then people like, oh, I'll take care of you. I paid for accommodation. Okay, let's guess. How many times did I pay for accommodation while I was on the road for 382 days? 7 times only. 7 times. It was incredible. And so this last question, why do people like helping each other? I don't really have an answer for it, but it's just true. We like helping each other. We don't just like hurting each other. We really give each other an opportunity to be kind, ask for help. It's incredible kind of circle of reciprocity can start to flow. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
You kind of set the context in 2011
Mm.
when you first went to Paris to visit your grandma. Lots has changed in the world since then. How would Goosefeather take the journey today, given the changing context and the situation around the world?
I'm not sure that it could happen. I think that as much as there was already a culture of fear, we're deeper in it. We're deeper in it. And so like, yeah, I don't know how to take that, my response any further, really, unfortunately. You know, I just think of just little moments, like how was it okay for me? It wasn't okay, but it happened. Like, how was it okay for me to show up at the port in LA to get on that cargo ship? I got checked in, and then I was like, what? You're not lifting anchor until tomorrow? I gotta go. I got some people I want to see. So, and like a gallery I still got to get to. So I left my bags on the cargo ship. I think this was foolish, but I left my bags on the cargo ship and I left port. Nobody had checked, you know, there was no like, does she have drugs? Does she have a knife? Does she have anything? There was none of that, neither time, right? So what? Like I could have really been smuggling all kinds of awful things, and I wasn't. And I just don't think that kind of leniency exists anymore, right? Yeah. I think that the approach remains really important, like this way that each one of us, this opportunity every day, every moment of every day, we have an opportunity with every breath to chill out and to open our hearts and to exchange ourselves for another and say, hey, you know, like this person, maybe I can just like breathe in their suffering a little bit, not in a condescending, patronizing kind of way, but like, wow, misery is misery. And like, maybe I have a lot of privilege in this world. And so maybe I'm going to, with every breath, try to do that and try to be disarmed, because 382 days on the road showed me that as you walk through the world disarmed, the people are stepping up to help, you know, and I'm not naive. Like, hurt happens. There's passages in here where hurt happens for sure. But I still don't know what else I can do, right? I don't know a better practice for making the world a better place. And I'm an eternal hopeful with rose-colored glasses and some pom-poms of cheerleadings, right? So like, forgive me, I'm 45 and I'm still that. So I don't think it's stopping. I think I saw your hand.
I just wondered what would have been the actuating impulse for the journey? I'm thinking it may have been your discussions with your grandfather, but the actual journey itself, and did that transform into a kind of purpose, and how did that influence the structure of the actual places that you determined you wanted to get to? I understand the cherry blossom thing. There must have been more than that.
Yeah, you know, when I was interviewing my grandfather, and I promised him, I said, I will come back and I will share this story. And he died before I was able to show him the finished product, because I'm slow. But my mother had brought me when he was in hospice, and he had a tube down his throat, and two-way conversation was quite difficult. But I said, you know, grand-père, this is what I have. This is the structure that I'm thinking to use. And he said, you know, that appears just and honest, which felt like a real stamp of approval. And then I reiterated my promise of, if I couldn't share it with him and somehow the lessons of his life, that I would do so with family. And then I had a train wreck moment in my mind where I went, well, I can't tell this story about being in right relation and just be like, on an airplane. I can't, like, it just felt very out of integrity. Though, I mean, we could have a long conversation about what has a bigger carbon impact, you know, a cargo ship or an airplane. Like, so it's more conceptual than anything else. But that train wreck moment was like, wow, it'd be out of integrity for me just to like fly about. And, oh, I have a friend who took a cargo ship once, and oh, I also could take a cargo ship. And oh, okay, so that's what I'm going to do. And maybe it was just that prosaic, right? It was just this like, I like adventure. I want to be in integrity. I am not necessarily somebody who thinks too far in advance, although I do also worry a lot and consider consequences and all the rest of it, right? So, yeah, and I guess that did become a guiding principle where it was remaining very open to the different offerings that people would make. Like, oh, you're going to be passing through England. Well, why don't you go to the University of Edinburgh, where I would like to program you for a storytelling workshop in the Department of Environmental Education. If I had been so like regimented, I would never have gone to Edinburgh. I would never have seen Arthur's Seat. I would never have marveled at the teeth of the tectonic plates carving up through the planet, right? So yeah, it was this delicate balance, this measure, very fine measure between planning and remaining very open. And I think it served me well. I think it served me well. Sure.
Your presentations, I gather that they are based
Honk,
on
honk.
a lifetime of gathering stories and telling the stories.
Mm.
But your actual presentations when you're on the road, were they largely extempore or impromptu?
Oh, good question. So I would perform Goosefeather. So that was the scripted, costumed, gestural vocabulary. And I had the good fortune to also be able to offer, I have a repertoire of over 100 traditional folk and fairy tales from all over the planet. And I have experience as an educator, workshop facilitator, community engagement person, right? So I was able to offer that. And that meant that I came home with $100 in my bank account, which is pretty fantastic if you think about it. Solo female artist, works her way around the planet and comes home not in debt. That gets a pat on the back. Thank you, thank you. And we have just under 15 minutes left. And so unless there's like a burning question or topic of conversation that we want to end on, I thought I could read another passage. Elizabeth says yes. It's a short passage. It's the return. It's not a spoiler. You know I made it back. See, here I am. Let's start here. Yeah, it really is it's a short little last passage. Seashelt, day 381. Before preparing for that night's show, I stood by ocean, listening to the of pebbles rolling and sounding in the waves. An arbutus curving over sandstone peeled back its skin, revealing the colors within, rubbed velvet flame. I grew up part of an ecology inclusive of squelquel, sinulka, barnacles, seals, kelp, cormorant, geese, eagles, ravens, and xpe, kinnikinick, salal, and ocean spray. There are many precious compositions made from land, ocean, wave, crash, and shore. Old growth stands are highly fragmented. These forest communities are imperiled, yet water and the next bulge of land do still dream into being seal noses poking up to smell the air. These were good to come home to. Vancouver, day 382. December 12th, 2015, a full house at Full Circle Studios marked the end of Goosefeather's intended trajectory through time-space and her final show. I zipped on the corset and surrendered to prayer, become a temple unto myself. Would that I speak words of merit, foster empathy and understanding in me. These are valuable assets. It began. Once upon a time, long, long ago, went on a cartographic adventure. After more than a year on the road, Goosefeather's text and gestural vocabulary had ripened. I had grown strength and confidence with which to step into a corpus of thought and perform right relation. I spoke about being of the land with certainty in gesture and ferocity of gaze, letting pride and clarity manifest themselves. This was good to come home to. The audience and I mapped our bodies, finding our diaphragms and breathing together. Each situated themselves at their own center, and we acknowledged where we were. From the point zero of presence, limbs reaching and flapping, I twirled and paraded, goose body delighting in life. Honk, honk, come, let's fly in a V together. Honk, honk. Extending and wheeling within a full circle of space could be felt the power of a wingspan well deployed. The show's structure had become a container within which meanings met and magnified. Family and friends, strangers and acquaintances laughed, listened. Being together made it easier. It was so satisfying. The promise to share Goosefeather with family had been kept. I'd brought an inquiry into measurement and right relation onto my body using self as prime meridian. My desire to conduct a rigorous experiment in cartography, rationality, and repeatability in order to test the hypothesis that if you give love, you get love had been met. In a time of intensified fear-mongering, a sustained gesture towards life had been made. Curiosity, an outward gaze, open heart, and resonant mind cultivated. I'd felt the emergent paradigm manifest through practicing right relation and by connecting to place. My participation in social justice and the circular economy had grown. I aver, ours is an interdependent world of kindness, wonder, failure, pain, and mystery concurrently occurring every moment. This is good to come home to. It's a good story, isn't it? Aftertime. I belong to these tales. I sense in them my curiosity. Sometimes the smell of metal heating in the sun transports me back to Grandpère's living room. I can see him standing, spine neatly stacked, blue eyes intense. I can hear him telling me the story of a fine and delicate scale he once gifted to another. His "I'm proud of you despite myself" smile is tugging at his lips. Chacun à sa hauteur, he is saying, each to their own height. It's a wonderful moment. In that apartment in Paris, I breathe deep, letting warmth transport me. It took years for the internal swirl caused by my journey around the planet to abate, for measured words written to take precedence over the mutable memories of an experience. Witness, a book. To those of you who have read this tome and seen your name upon the pages, hello. I hope you are doing well. In representation, I trust I have not deviated too far from truth. If I have strayed causing harm, please let me be forgiven. Time belongs to no one. As we know, endings make beginnings in endless procession. For now, full stop, my hand, full stop. We've come to the end of the Goosefeather adventure story. Fingertips and keyboards, I thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for your fruitful questions.
I've got a question.
Sure. Okay.
For people who know Paris, in a plaza in front of Notre Dame Cathedral, there's a plaque that says 0.0.
Yeah.
You've mentioned 0.0 a couple
Yeah.
times in your talk. You talked about. If you were asked someday to identify a point zero in Vancouver area, where would you locate it?
Wow, the first thing that came to mind was the House of Learning at UBC, because they don't use the Dewey Decimal System. They don't do like folk and fairy tales. If you go into any library, you want to find the folk and fairy tales, you go to 398.2. But I know that. But you go to the House of Learning. The reference point, it's a different reference point. It's geolocation. It's like how far you are from, like how close you were born to the place is how the book is categorized or something. So that's what comes to mind right now is the House of Learning at UBC. Yeah, thank you.
So thank you very much, Naomi.
Pleasure.
Quite fascinating. And so you will be, did you call it the writing?
Yeah, if you're down, just through here and where the windows are, there's 3 signing tables. Please come and say hello. And if you want to open your pocketbook, then that's really great too. I've got books for sale, hardcover and softcover.
Great. And we also have brochures for the Canadian Authors Association for anyone who's interested.
Definitely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Just one question.
Mm.
Can I buy your jacket?